With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Ayin Ches. We're going to learn a little bit more about this futuristic stream that's going to be coming out of the Kodesh Kachim that will literally heal the entire world. That's going to lead us into the question of how high must a mikvah be for one who's mechuyev to go to the mikvah to be allowed to toivel in it. The question of height is really connected to the issue of chatzitza. If the mikvah waters are very low, the person who's going to be in there will have to, so to say, bend over to an extreme in order to be completely submerged under the water. This creates certain parts of the body that, because of the creases being bent, maybe the water doesn't properly go into it. And we'll see, Alachatchila, Abediyevid, all connected from this water, the stream that's leaving the Beis HaMikdash. We're going to be coming back and we're going to be learning about more details of the Isur Rechitza on Yom Kippur. We learned yesterday that one of the exceptions is that a person is allowed to walk through water, to wade through water, if you're going for a purpose other than just getting pleasure from being bathed. And the question we will deal with today is we're going to jump a little bit over to the Hilchas Shabbos. On Shabbos, there's no Isur of Ne'ilas HaSandal. It was the shoes that they used to wear then was worn in a way that when a person would walk through water, there was a higher chance for those shoes to fall off. And as you remember, what we learned in Masechta Shabbos is that there are many things that we are prohibited to do in order for us not to come and carry. If you remember, for example, a person shouldn't go with gloves on Shabbos because when they meet their fellow in the street, when they say Shalom Aleichem, they might take off the glove and they will forget they'll carry the glove. So we're going to be questioning about certain dinim of Shabbos. We're going to jump, as we'll see in a moment why, to some pratim in Hilchos of a Bechor. When we have domesticated animals from all three types, that means cows, sheep, and goats, their first male offspring, if the first offspring is male, becomes automatically a Bechor, and even Bizman Hazeh, it must be gifted to a Kohen. Now, when the animal is unblemished, it's supposed to be brought as a korban. Now that there isn't yet a Beis HaMikdash, when the animal becomes halachically blemished, it becomes then property of the Kohen. The Kohen can do with it whatever he pleases. So therefore, since the Kohen is an Egeya B'davar, one thing now for the animal to get blemished, the Kohen is not qualified to render and to halachically paskin, this is a mum, even if it's clear that it's a mum. So really, you need to have experts that have a smicha specifically to paskin whether the animal is blemished or not. And we're going to be questioning whether a kohen is eligible to be such a poisik. We'll see why we'll see why not. It's really a machloikes tanoim. And we're going to be questioning what's mamish negea lamaisa, whether the isur of ne'ilas hasandal is limited only to that which is halachically considered a shoe, and leather is the only material that renders a shoe halachic shoe. For example, the whole din of chalitza. Chalitza is only valid if the shoe that's being worn and removed is leather. If that would be the case, then the isur of ne'ilas hasandal is only leather, and other shoes made out of other materials. In the times of Chazal, they would have shoes that were made out of reeds, made out of rush, a sandal shal sha'am. Today you have a lot more sophisticated types of shoes that will be permitted. And the question will be, maybe the isur of ne'ilas hasandal is not limited only to that which is halachically considered shoes, and therefore any type of foot covering would be included in the isur. And as we all know, we paskin that it is dafka limited to a sandal, to ne'ilas, to what halacha considers a shoe, which is leather. And finally, we're going to discuss whether these inuyim are mitzvahs that we are mechuyev to be mechanech our children in, or dafka not. And we will see that when the children are very young, dafka not, because anything that's needed for the development of a child is something that the child needs to have every single day. And we're going to conclude with some very interesting psychological or emotional parts that are needed for the development of a child, and much much more. I know the Amud Aleph looks very intimidating. Don't worry, Chevra. Daf Ayin Ches is little and Daf Ayin Tes is very small. Whatever we won't learn today, we'll, God willing, make up tomorrow. We left off on Daf Ayin Zayin Amud Beis. We are 4 lines before the bottom of the Amud. Again, learning about the stream that Yecheskel saw in his Nevuah that's going to be emerging from the Holy Temple in the future. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Pinchas, in the name of Rab Huna Tzipoy Ra'ah. The spring that's going to be emerging from the Holy of Holies. So Batchila, we had this in Shkolim. In the beginning, that means when it goes out of the ground, it goes from little to big. It's the opposite of Olam Hazeh. You begin with big, right? You have a lot of money in your account, and then in just a matter of time, it gets smaller. It goes from big, you have a lot of food on your plate, it goes to smaller. Here it's pung fakert. It begins with an akuda, and then it's mispashet. So first, this is literally, it's the size. There's many drushes on the meanings of the examples that we are using, but let's first read Pashat the Pshat. It's going to be in the width of the antennas of locusts, which is very, very skinny. Once it reaches the door to the Heichal, it already gets bigger. So when you have these weaving machines, the looms, so the warp thread is skinnier than the woof thread. So first it's going to be in the width of the skinnier one. Once we come into the antechamber, we're going further out. It becomes already as thick as the woof thread. The last line in the Amid, then already and it becomes as wide as the mouth of a small flask. And now we understand behind the Tanan, the Mishnah in Midrash, that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, this is regarding the area through which the water exits. We learned this in Yoma, I think. We definitely learned this in Shkolim, that it is the most eastern of the Chatzer's southern gates. If you held cup, so the easternmost southern gate is the gate through which the water will go underneath. And the Mishnah writes that Mayim, Daf Ayin Ches, Mefachim, the word Mefachim comes from the words Pach. Waters as wide as that which issues from the mouth of a flask. That's mamash what we just learned. Asidim li yoitzin mitachas miftan habayis. Because by the time it's leaving the threshold of the Beis Hamikdash, it's way larger than the initial little antenna of Chagavim. And Mekan ve'elach, once it mamash leaves the Beis Hamikdash, hoyim izgaber v'olam, keeps on getting larger, keeps on rising up. Rising up also means it gets wider. Until it comes to the house, to the door of the house of David. Now, where is the Beis David? So the last Rashi on Daf Ayin Zayin Amud Reis writes that refers to Tzion, otherwise known as Har Tzion. And where is that? Chutz Yerushalayim. So David HaMelech's house is going to be right outside Choymos Yerushalayim. The path that the water will go on will go by mamish, the door of the house of David. Back inside Daf Ayin Ches, 3 lines from the top of the Amid, and Kivin Shemagia LaPesach Beis David. By now, Nasik Kenachal Shoitev, it becomes a swift flowing, almost like a rapids stream, and it's going to be so mighty, so large, Shabai Roichatzin, that now who can bathe in there? Zavim and Zavos, which is great, because we know that a Zav has to go to Mayim Chayim, and it's not Taka Mayim Chayim. In other words, it's spring water, which is why we don't care that it's zoichalin. Normally, by May mikvah, zoichalin is completely invalidates the mikvah. It has to be ashboinim. Zavin and zavos and nidois and yoldois. Shenemar, as it says, a pasuk in Zechariah, that by Yoma hu yi makoir niftach, there's going to be a spring, a source of water that will open up, and the pasuk specifically links it to the house of David, because it's going to be passing by his house, Uli Yoshve Yerushalayim, and those waters will be used, Lachatos Ulanida. Here, the word chatos, as it means many times, it's in the positive. For cleansing, Lachatos means for cleansing. It's like the Mechatos by the Paraduma. And Ulanida means for purification of a Nida. So now came along Rabbi Yosef and he made a Gavaldik halachic observation. Why is the pasuk linking this makor, this spring, that it's going to be a mikveh, it's going to be a source of water for cleansing when it passes by Beis David. The water is going to be available prior to it reaching there. And now we understand the answer, because only when it reaches the Beis David is it going to be very large, like we just said, right? It's going to be a nachal shoitev. So that says Rabbi Yosef. From here we learn that the water needs to have a minimum height for it to be valid for a mikvah. Mikan remez that lenidam shetzricha leishav atzavar b'mayim, that the mikvah waters has to be up until her neck, like we mentioned in the intro, because if it's going to be lower down, then she would have to bend over more for her to be submerged underwater. And it's not only a nida, it can be by a zav. And then the creases in the body, according to Rabbi Yosef, creates a chatzitza. It's an interposition. The water has to be mamish on all of the body. A lot has to be spoken about this, but let's just read the bottom line. Says the Gemara v'lei silchas hakavasei. We do not paskin like Rabbi Yosef. For people that know today, mikvahs are actually dafka not that tall. Lechatchila we paskin that the mikvah should be a zeres. A zeres is the space between the tip of the thumb and the tip of the pinky. A zeres, which is called, I think, a hand span, is exactly half of an amma. Means if you're going to measure an amma is from the tip of your middle finger until your elbow. 2 zeresin, mamish, make up an amma. Lechatchila, the waters of the mikvah should be 1 zeres above the navel, above the belly button, which is dafka why mikvahs have steps, because many women have different heights. And that's only lechatchila, but we know that b'diavad, just don't know the halacha, if the waters, when she was standing, was taller and she went under, it's okay. If the waters were shorter, as long as the person in there lay down and the water was over them, it's also okay. There is a lechatchila dika height, but lechatchila we paskin that the woman's position in the mikveh, we learned this when we get married, and we should review it, it should be like when a woman is kneading dough. These are the words of Chazal. That means that she's bent over, and with all of the intent that the hands should not clench, that the lips should not purse, or there's another word in English for that, shouldn't be too tight. In all of these things, b'diavad, you can't say that the mikvah is not kosher, but there is a lot of effort needed for a woman to be in a position where the water is able to enter to the most that we are able into all of the circumference and all of the periphery of the body, which is also why l'chatchila we don't go into the ocean, because when a person is going into an environment, into a mikveh where a person has certain fears, or it's uncomfortable, or it's very cold, it's very difficult to be mindful in getting in the position that creates the minimum amount of chatzitza possible. B'diavad it's okay because of the rule, kol haroya lebila, since it's ra'ui, v'chulei, and let's go weiter. Okay, now Rashi takes out the parentheses, and we're going to be jumping for a while from Yom Kippur to Shabbos. We're going back to that which we learned yesterday, that the rechitza is a limited prohibition. One is allowed to walk through water, and the lashon was until the neck, to go to be makabel, pnei rabbi, pnei aviv, to go do a mitzvah, maybe even a teacher going to the student. And now we're going to go into Shabbos issues. Again, on Yom Kippur, no one is wearing shoes. Whatever they would wear on their feet, if they wore anything, would not fall off walking through water. But on Shabbos, that people wear shoes, we're speaking about in an area where there's no Eruv. The Gemara wants to know, Shabbos, the Ikal Minol, are we also allowed to walk through water? The issue here is not about schita, even though we spoke about this on Shabbos with the garments. For that, you lift the garment to a certain degree. Here, the issue is, am I allowed to walk through water when there's a chance that the water is going to, so to say, get my shoes off, and then I might end up carrying it? And if you remember, Masechta Shabbos, this fear of maybe you'll end up carrying it is a substantial fear, and there are many gzeros that were made because of it. Will we make it on Shabbos regarding walking through a body of water? So Amar Nehemiah, guys, the first medium-sized line, the real wide ones is in the bottom, which Nehemiah, the chasnei, the son-in-law of the Nasi, that Anoch Azise, I saw both Ravami and Avasi, that the Matu Urkuma Damayam, that they came upon a pool of water. Obviously, we're speaking about Shabbos, Va'avirua, and they went through it and they crossed it derech malbush while they were wearing shoes. In other words, I saw that these Amoraim had no such concern. Now, happened to be that in that story, they were wearing a minol, a minol, which is tied to the shoe, was properly fastened. It was tied tightly on the foot. The chances of a minol falling off was less. So we have a proof from them that by a minol you can walk through water. What about a sandal? Sandal had harder leather in the times of Chazal. Harder means it did not fit around the foot. So it was tied on, but it wasn't that tightly tied because of the hardness of the leather. Higher chance it's going to fall off. So my ikala meimar amar avrichumi that anna chazisi leravina that he also walked through a body of water on Shabbos derech malbush. Obviously, the malbush here means a sandal. Now, guys, remember this. Remember that Ravina walked through water with the sandals. However, the Rashi says b'negeya the shoe. Like Rav Ami and Avasi, even lechatchila, but by a sandal, which was not as tightly fitted, higher chance it's going to fall off. At least lechatchila not. So that we have clarity. So minol lechatchila yes, according to Ravina, even sandal lechatchila yes, and Avashi says sandal lechatchila loy. Says the Gemara story that the Reish Galusa ikla lahagroinia. He went to the village or to the city or to the town of Agronia. And where did he spend Shabbos? To the household of Rab Nassan. Who was this Rab Nassan? It's very common that in certain cities, there is the one Machnus Oirech, everyone stays there. Whether because, in this case, Mustama, the Kashrus was on the highest level. And who stayed there? Rafram, V'kul Rabbanan. 1 second. And Rafram, V'kul Rabbanan, I take that back. But I'm going to also look at Pirka. In other words, the minig was that the Reish Galusa, which was really the head of the government, some of them were very learned, some of them were a little bit learned, but they were the ones that gave the drasha on Shabbos, and to give them covet, Rafram and all of the sages of Hagronia came to hear the drasha of the Reish Galusa in the house of Rab Nassan, to the one exception, that the Amoira Ravina didn't come. Now, the Reish Galusa might have therefore had some sort of unpleasant feelings towards Ravina. He was snubbed by Ravina. Rafram is going to now try to protect Ravina. So what happens? L'machar asar Rafram la'afuke leRavina medate de Reish Galusa. That's a good expression. In other words, Rafram began to ask Ravina, why didn't you come? The reason why he was asking that of him, it was not because he was nosy. It wasn't even because he personally cared. That Rafram didn't want for the Reish Galusa to be angry at Ravina. He wanted to hear what happened, and he was confident that he'll hear something which will then give him true ammunition to go to the Reish Galusa and to tell him, by the way, my Chaver Ravina didn't go because X, Y, and Z. Don't be upset at him. That's called La'afuke leRavina midaite de Reish Galusa. And Amar Lei, so Rafram asked Ravina, my Tamalo Yosim Alapika, why didn't you come here, the drasha of the Reish Galusa? So Amar Lei told him practical, because my feet were hurting. And by the way, then if many people walk without shoes, if the bottom of your feet are hurting, you're not going to walk. So he counters. He tells him that's not good enough of an excuse. You should have put on your shoes and come to the drasha. So Ravina further clarified, no, that gaba the karayava, the top of my feet were hurting. In other words, putting on shoes would hurt me. So he told him, fine, you should have put on a sandal. It's here clearly you see that the difference between a minon and a sandal, they both share the bottom, the sole. You're not walking on pebbles, but the minon was covered by the top, like our shoes, and the sandal also like our sandalim. There's less stuff on top of the foot. So Amalei, to which Ravina responded, no, I couldn't have put on a sandal because urkuma damaya hava beurcha. Because there was a gathering, there's a pool of water in between my house and the house of Rab Nassan, which is where the Reish Galusa gave the speech, gave his drasha. If I would have been wearing sandals, I would not have been allowed to walk through the pool of water. So weiter, Rafram is telling him, but you could have worn your sandals and walked through in water. Didn't you hear that Ravashi said not? So here's the big discussion. Was that at Peretz? Because we just learned before that Ravina didn't say lachatchila noi. One pshat can be that Ravina, after he heard from Rav Ashi that lachatchila noi, he acquiesced to Rav Ashi. Another pshat is that he was looking for an excuse. And the Rafram perhaps was unable to bring over this excuse to the Reish Galusa because the Reish Galusa was learned enough to know that Ravina held lachatchila, yes. Anyways, that's the end of the story. Weiter. Tana Yehuda bar giroi gorois. Asur leishev al gabe tina b'yoyim HaKippurim. Wow. Chayz tina is a mound of mud. So says this Tana, one is not allowed to sit on top of this mud. On Yom Kippur, ufarvos, Rashi, 9 lines from the top of the Amid, al gabe tina, says Rashi, shel lichluach hatit, the lichluach, the lachluchias, the moistness of the mud, hava oinig, gives you pleasure, and karoiv l'rechitza. Kevin has a picture, Gavaldik, and it's karoiv l'rechitza. Now, explain something. We just learned in the beginning of the sugya 2 daf ago that there's no inyan to make yourself uncomfortable on Yom Kippur, right? There's no mitzvah to go sit in the sun or to go be cold. The type of pleasure that's prohibited has to be connected to bathing, to washing, if it's in the category of this inui. So since it's moist and cool, that's the key. It's moist and cool. That's why, even though it's not clean, you're not going into it. You're just sitting on it. That's called Larashi Karev L'Rechitza, and it is included in the inui of Rechitza. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. However, there has to be a higher level of moistness. And so he says it has to be ubetina mitapachas. It has to be dafke mud that is oozing moisture. It's not just moist, it's giving off moisture. And now we have the famous line, and Abaye clarifies that. That's a very important expression. Tefeach almanas latfiach means that how moist is it that the item that it touches itself becomes so moist that it can further give off moisture. So if I'm moist and I touch you and you become a little bit moist, but you can't pass it off, that's not called lachluchias. And that's really our whole goal, that we should have the schus to channel something that the recipient should also become a mashpia. Okay, weiter. Omar Rabbi Yehuda, that indeed it's not just about the pleasure of getting cool, but it's about the pleasure of getting cooled off from something that's moist. And therefore, if a person is hot on Yom Kippur and there was no air conditioning then, and they have a pile of, apples, and the apples are cool, you can go in the pile of apples. You can cool off with fruit. It's not moist. Rav Yehuda himself was mitztanen bekara. He had kwash. He called off with kwash. Rabba, what's the Bach? Rava, says the Bach, mitztanen biyanuka. And Nebuchadnezzar the Yanuka, there was a child. The child was cooled off. He held a baby. No, try that today. Who's the next one according to him? And Rabba, he mitztanen bechasa, bekasa de chaspa. He would hold a silver cup, metal. He had, what metal did he have? He had silver, and he would cool himself off with that. Put it against his forehead. Oigevalt, we're lucky to have air conditioning. Omar Rav Papa, or the Mesoides Asra says this is Rav Ashi. No. Chasa de chaspa malay. If the silver cup is full, then it is asur. Why says Rashi Shema yishpuchu mayim al b'sarai? Because it's full, so water might spill out. However, only when it's chassid, when it's deficient, then it's muted. However, the pachra is earthenware cups, either the idi asur, even though it's not full. Full is asur, not full is asur. Why? Those are those earthenware kalim. Because mishum the mishchal shachil, because liquid seeps out. Today everything is glazed. Yeah, Rabbi glazed it. It's a whole different thing. Then you had an earthenware utensil and it garnished. It mamish, it leaked out. It means when you filled it up with mashke, you made a lachayim ASAP. If you didn't make a lachayim, before you turned around, there was nothing left. Okay. Here again, here it's Rav Ashi. Before a lot of girsois. Rav Ashi Yoma. Kosa de chaspa, or Rav Papa Amad. Kosa de chaspa, even chassid, even if it's not full nami asur. It's not going to ooze out. It's not going to overflow. There's another issue. He holds mishum dim miz darev, because the cup itself, the silver is slippery. So the cup will slip, and then again, Rashi says, and the water will fall on you. Which we have to have foresight It's not that I didn't have kavana to get wet. I only wanted to cool off. You have to be careful that if it's an item that might slip, that might spill, that might ooze, be mindful of that and don't touch it even though you need to cool off. It's
interesting that they're not worried that you might drink it.
Yeah, it would not
so you're worried you might wash, but not that you might take a sip. I don't know.
No, because everyone knows, even according to the shitas, that everything is us and midoiraisa, kares is on drinking. And you're not even bathing. It's only if it might slip, so your toe will get wet. Yeah, it makes sense. People might treat us lightly, and the point that we learned yesterday is that the isur rechitza is even on the minority of the body, on one aver, if it's l'shem tainuk. Okay, here is where everyone gathered. Zeira bar Chama was the ush pizichanin. He ended up being the host of Ravami and Avasi and Abishua ben Levi and all of the Chachamim in Kesarei. So that's the one. In other words, he was the Fruma home in Kesarei, and it doesn't mean that all of these Chevra were at the same time. He ended up over the years hosting a lot of Chachamim. And the beauty is, aside of the schus of Achnasas Archim, is that he observed behaviors of different Chachamim. So because of that, Amalei, this is the host, Zeira, once met Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, and again, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi used to stay in his home whenever he was in Kesarei, and he called Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi the lion, so he called his son, Bar Aryeh, you son of the lion, come, Emelach Milsa, Ma'al Yisrael, let me tell you something beautiful, something special, the Hava Avid Avuch, that I observed your father doing. What was that? And this is a big, wonderful meaning that it's very easy to be machmir. But the great chachamim who know exactly what's permitted and what's prohibited, so then, the koyach of a Torah is adif. There was something that we would never think is permitted, especially after we learned. Don't even hold a silver cup. But what did Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi do? Mitpachas hoyeloi be'erev Yom Kippur. He would take a towel every erev Yom Kippur. And listen, v'shoyra oisa b'mayim, and he would soak the towel in water. Narvas then, don't forget that on Yom Kippur, like on Shabbos, the arisuri of schita. If you remember, we spoke this out on Shabbos many times, that if there is water inside a garment, squeezing it out is connected to malabein. So therefore we have to be careful not to squeeze out water from a garment. So if you have something that's very wet, you can't even lift it up. So because of that, he would make it dryish, meaning he would wring it out. Not all of the water, it's not what he gained, but he took out enough water before Yom Kippur. And on Yom Kippur, he would wipe. Our girsa here is panav yadav adaglav, his face, his hands, and his feet. Many Rishonim have another girsa here. Since he needed to wring it out, there wasn't enough for him to be mekaneach panav yadav adaglav. He was mekaneach his eyes. Didn't we say Isser Rechitza? Yes, but we said the definition of Rechitza is Toifeach al manas lahatfiach. So there was enough moisture for him to get cooled off and for him to take away whatever is around the eyes when you wake up. But since the eyes, or if the girsa is correct, the Panav Yadav did not get moist enough that if something else touched it, it would also become moist, it was permitted. That means he went all the way until the limit. And similarly, at Tisha B'Av also is, we are obligated to observe the same 5 inuyim. Shoyra oisa b'mayim, he would also take a towel, this is Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, and he would soak it into water. On Tisha B'Av, there is no Isser Schita, which is why he doesn't mention anything here about wringing it out. Ulamachar mavira, here our version is al-gabe einov, but again, it doesn't fit, because since he did not squeeze out, did not wring out the water, there was more liquid in there. Not enough liquid to make a tefeach amanas latfiach. But many changed the girsa, that it was on Yom Kippur that he was mavir al gabe einov, and it was on Tisha B'Av that he was mikaneach ba padav yanav v'raglav. According to this girsa that we flip it, the next word works. V'chein, it wasn't only Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Ki asa Rabba bar Mari Amar, that me'erev Tisha B'Av mevi'in loi mitapachas, they would always bring him a towel, and they would soak it in water. And umanicha tachas merashoisav, and here he would put it under his head at night in order for him to preserve the moisture. It's never enough moisture to feach amanas latfiach. In other words, they were not so, it's amazing. They knew they were great people. They knew exactly the boundary. And they went here until the boundary because you don't have to be ma'ana yourself more than needed. Ulamachar, and this fits the gears of above, that on Tisha B'Av, because there was no worry of schita, so less water was wrung out. He was mekaneach padayot v'raglov. It was never to feach amanas latfiach. And if Yom Kippurim, b'diram leimat pachas. They did the same thing. But since schita v'shoyda amayim, they would fill it up with water. But they would then partially dry it out. They would wring it out. They would squeeze it out. And on Yom Kippur, ma'avira al gabe einov. And Chavre, today we know in Shulchan Aruch that when you wake up in the morning, we just learned the Tosfos, right? And last Amud Mishum Shifta, that we wash negel vaser dafka until the knuckles. You have a Gavaldik letter from the Rebbe's father that explains that because of the great kedusha of Yom Kippurim, the ruach ra that remains on one's hands has lesser power. It only is able to go until the knuckles, which is why negel vaser Yom Kippur is until the knuckles, even though after Yom Kippur we have to properly wash our hands all the way down to the wrist, but we wash our hands in the morning, and one is allowed to take that water and to be ma'aver al gabe einov. That's the way we paskin today. And that for sure is connected to that which we are learning right over here from the great lion from Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. All right. That Ibcha Amratlan, that your version was the way it was written before. You told us that this was done both on Tisha B'Av and on Yom Kippur, but your version was that on Erev Tisha B'Av he would wring it out, and before Yom Kippur you didn't mention that, and we Taka refuted your version. The Oisvinach, no, that the issue of schita is only connected to Yom Kippur. And yeah, he used the towel on Tisha B'Av, he used the towel on Yom Kippur. It must be the way we just mentioned, that when would he wring out the towel, Kimin Kalim Neguvim Dafka Erev Yom Kippurim. Amar Rav Menashe bar Tachlifa. In the name of Amar Rav Amram, in the name of Amar Rav Bar Chana. Sho'alu es Rabbi Elazar, put the comma here, not Rabbi Eliezer Hazokin. Rabbi Elazar, this is the Amoira. Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas. Now there were two questions that were asked of him. The second one is related to Yom Kippur, which is why we are also already relating the first as well, which is not Bechlal connected to Yom Kippur, and that's the beauty. We get to learn here, we get to learn there. So me'inyan to a whole different inyan, there is an obligation for all of us, even Bisman Hazeh, to give our firstborn male offspring from a cow, from a sheep, and from a goat to a kohen. And if you remember the pratim, that we have to raise it only up until a certain age, after which we give it to the kohen. If there is a Beis HaMikdash, when there is a Beis HaMikdash, the kohen has an obligation to bring it as a korban b'chor. When there is no Beis HaMikdash yet, he can't do anything with it. He has to wait until it gets blemished. With all of the forewarnings that the kohen who's in a Gabadava not only obviously may not be matal mum bekachim, but once the animal gets a blemish, the kohen, as learned as he is not qualified to paskin that this is called a blemish. Happens to be that just like nowadays, let's say a person can get shimush in a beis din just for maris. You can get shimush in a beis din only for resafrus. Like there are specialized fields for which someone today will get the authorization to paskin halachas. So one of those specified fields then, when people owned animals, was a person should get a permit, a smicha, in order for him to paskin regarding blemishes. And actually, there were certain kibudim that were left dafka for the nasi in Eretz Yisrael. If you wanted to get a permit to be mater mumen, you needed to get your smicha signed by the nasi. So they asked Rabbi Elazar, Zakin v'yoshen v'yeshiva, who needs to get the smicha? A balabas. What happens if you have a zaken v'yoshev v'yeshiva? Rashi says if someone is a member of the Sanhedrin, if someone is sitting in the Sanhedrin, for him these details, of course he knows them. Tzarich litul reshus. Does he also have to get a permit, a smicha from the nasi to be matir b'chayroi? So yena tzarich. In other words, the Gemara clarifies, what was underlying the question that they asked Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas. That there were certain kibbudim that they left for the Nasi in Eretz Yisrael, and one of them was and why did you need to get the permit from the Nasi? He wasn't always the most learned, but they did it. They wanted to make sure that he's held on high esteem. So once certain things, you need to have you sign the check. So then people are machabed you. In order for the Nasi to have more kibud, they made the rule that you need to have a heter. You need to have a smicha to be mater b'chayris by determining whether whatever you see is halachically a blemish or not. The Nasi has to be the one giving the smicha. So therefore, you have to give him kavod. Sarech litul rishus. The counter is, balabas needs to have rishus, even a rav. But if someone is a member of the Sanhedrin, come on, he already knows that. So that is what they asked of Rabbi Elazar. So Amar Rab Tzadok ben Chaluka al Ragla v'Amar, before Rabbi Elazar responded, that Ani ro'isi es Rabbi Yosi ben Zimra, that shezaken, v'yoshev v'yishiyah, and he once stood in front of the grandfather of the current Nasi. He went to the Nasi of his times. And the natal reshus lahater b'chayros. In other words, the best thing is hamaisu hu ha'ikr. In other words, you have a story that I witnessed how a member of the Sanhedrin got reshus. Is that ayah that even though that you're taka sitting in the Sanhedrin, but this kibud that they afforded by saying that if you want to have the smicha to be matir b'chayros, you have to get your permit, so to say, from the Nasi, goes even to a zaken that's yoshev v'yeshiva. So Amalei Rav Abba, no. I know the story, but you don't understand that story. It's not connected to what we asked here of Rabbi Elazar. The same person. You're right. It was Rabbi Yosi ben Zimra. Rabbi Yosi ben Zimra himself was a kohen. The issue wasn't not whether you need to get authorization. There was another issue. Is a kohen eligible for this authorization? Don't forget that the Chazal said, the Rashi quotes from Sanhedrin, that a kohen is never allowed to be matir his own b'chayr because he's an negeh b'davar. Even if he's the greatest, even if he would have had the smicha, it's not negeh. A kohen cannot be matir his own. So the issue that you remember you're testifying about is not whether he needed to have the nasi to sign off, whether he needs authorization, which is what they asked of Rabbi Elazar. There's a prior question. Is a kohen eligible? Whether he needs the smicha, whether he's already lamusmach because he's sitting in the Sanhedrin. So, this is what the issue was. The issue was, now this is actually a machlekes tanoim. Do we say halacha kirav meir, the amar that hachashud bedavar, which is the case of a kohen for his own womb, since he's chashud for himself, loy danoi, he may never judge such cases with others. He may never testify for others. So in other words, do we say that a kohen is not even eligible? Oidilmo, we paskin like halacha. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. What does Rav Shimon ben Gamliel hold? That no, even though the kohen is not believed for his own b'chayrim, but nemanu al shel chaveiroi, even though ve'ein neman al shel atzmai. And yet that's what happened. And when he came in front of the Zayd of the current Nasi, the question he doesn't speak about whether he needed the actual smicha. All he said is that they paskined that halacha kirash bag, that he's eligible. Now, did he actually need to get a smicha from him? We don't know. That wasn't part of the story. So this inquiry was thrown back to Rabbi Elazar. Now, what Rabbi Elazar said, the Gemara doesn't say over here. But the whole thing is only like an intro, because at that gathering, they asked of Rabbi Elazar two things. And it's here because the second one is Negea to Hilchas Yoma put him. And now they right away quoted the second question, the last line of the Amid. The Sukkami Bayalei, they also asked Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas, Mahu Lotzeis Bisandal Shel Sha'am. That's Gavaldik. Gavaldik is because, especially nowadays you can say that our sneakers are more comfortable than leather. Just to know, sha'am is a certain type of reed. In English, it's called rush. That was the alternative to the shoes. Then it was much less comfortable. But we'll speak about in a moment that Al-Pi Hasidus, Al-Pi Kabbalah, it's not about comfortability, it's about leather, which is taka why in halacha, the isur is, we limit the isur. But the question they asked of him, can you walk out on Yom Kippur with sandal shel sham, daf samach, daf ayin chesam et beis, v'yom HaKippurim. Min guma, shekoidim, I don't know, poye, pave, Rashi says. Now, the definition of a shoe is clear. A shoe means leather. And the source of that halacha is from chalitza. If chalitza is done with anything other than leather, the chalitza is invalid. No one is debating the definition of a shoe. The question is, when we said that on Yom Kippur there's an isur of ne'ilas sandal, whether it's midrabanan like Rashi and Tosfos, whether it's midiraisa like the Rambam, is it dafke halachic shoe, or is it anything that brings a certain amount of pleasure? Because the goal is, the bigger picture is to be afflicted. You know, when you don't wear shoes, you walk around, it's like an affliction. And if that would be the case, then you can't wear any comfortable foot covering. So we have, interestingly, so Amad Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani, Nachamo, it's amazing. They're asking Rabbi Lazar the second time, Velasnish the Rav Enfred. So here again, other people stuck their nose in. Amad Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani, Al Ragla, in a good way. Amar Ani Re'isis Rabbi Shua ben Levi. I saw Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Sheyotza besandal shal sha'am b'Yom Kippur. So as Araya, just like we had on Amad Aleph, that he would use that matpachas, in other words, he went to the limit. Whatever is asur is asur, and whatever is not asur, he did. He would walk out with a sandal, with a shoe made out of sha'am, today we got a rubber sneaker. Oh, now va'amina lei, and I, Rabbi Yitzchak, when I saw Rabbi Shlomo Levi, I asked him, "B'tainas tzibur mai." Ooh, what's the tainas tzibur? So don't jump. We're going to learn soon Masechta Tainas. Masechta Tainas, my friends, is Sipurei Tzadikim. The whole Masechta. And in there, sometimes you have a couple of halachas as well. One of the topics that are discussed in Masechta Tainis is that if there is a drought, we're speaking specifically about Eretz Yisrael, where the rain season was Mar Cheshvan, Mar Midli, so there were series of fast days. Once the second series were enacted, we'll learn this soon. Those were fast days that were oigavalt. Those second series were imposed on all of the congregation, on all of us, and we were obligated to have all the 5 Inuyim. Let's learn this Gemara, Kishitas Rambam. It's going to be easier to understand it, even though it doesn't refute the other opinions. On Yom Kippur, the 5 Inuyim are Midoraisa. These tiny Yois Tzibur, again, the second series is for sure Midrabanan. Now, there is a back and forth. Sometimes we say, by Doiraisa, you have to be more machmir, and by Yadarabanan, you can be more lenient. Sometimes we say that Divrei Chachamim Tzrichim Chizuk. Sometimes, as an irony, Dafke, for people not to take Divrei Chachamim lightly, they were even more machmir. So the question was based on this latter logic, that what happens in Tainas Sibur? There's also the 5 Inuyim, maybe because of Divrei Chachamim Tzrichim Chizuk, maybe on those Tainas Sibur, you may not even wear a sandal shal sham, but here he was still lean. Amalei, no, loishna. Loishna was also him testifying that he saw Rabbi Shua ben Levi, or he said on his own. But the Amalei, I don't think is Rabbi Lazar. So it's amazing that they asked of Rabbi Lazar and he didn't respond. Amar Rabbi bar Chana. Ani roisi es Rabbi Elazar de min Ninveh. Another story to prove the halacha from Shimush Chachamim. Sheyatza b'sandal shol sham b'tainas sibur. Now here we're going with the opposite logic. Tainas sibur is for sure only a midrabanan. So when I saw that by these fast days that the 5 Inuyim are only midrabanan, we were lenient, we limited the isur only to leather. So then I asked him, b'yom HaKippurim mai, maybe by Yodoraisa you have to be more machmir. So Amalei or Amarli, loishna. So we already have 2 opinions that are lenient. But Rav Yehuda, now you have to know how to learn the Gemara over here. Here, we're going to have Roiv Amoyroyim, we're lenient, but one will be Machmer. Rav Yehuda, Nafek, B'dei Hitnei. Hitnei is some sort of rush. Again, it's some sort of plant, some sort of reed. And they would make sandals or shoes out of it, and he would walk with it. Abaya Nafek B'dei Hutzei. he would make a shoe out of palm leaves. Rava nafek b'divlei or b'dikule, with grass or some other material that was a relative to what they had then. It was a substantial shoe, but it was not made out of leather. So all of these three Amoraim, like the two, we already have five, they were very lenient. L'choira, the last one, Rabba bar Rav Huna, he was more machmir. And he held that you're not allowed to wear a sandal shal sha'am. Now, it doesn't mean you have to walk barefoot. No. What did he do? Karech sudra kare. He would wrap his kerchief on his feet and he would go out. Now, wrapping a kerchief, that's mamish. I mean, maybe you're not going to get dirty, but you're going to feel every single pebble. So he was the more machman, and he felt, no, that it's about being comfortable, not covering your feet with something that protects it from what's underneath it, but you can still, even he held, you can put on a sudar, you can put on a kerchief. When I was a child, I don't know, you guys saw this, the elder generation, they would have one kerchief they had in their pocket, and they used it forever. They sneezed, they did, they put it back in their pocket, then they would put it around their neck if it was cold. Then on Yom Kippur, they would put it on their foot. I don't understand it, but that was the man. They were people that were very clean. It was an interesting minig. Okay, weiter. Masiv Rami Bar Chama. And this is such a great comparison. Shabbos. Shabbos, in Masechta Shabbos, we learned about a kiteya. Kiteya is an amputee. Today, Baruch Hashem, the prosthetics that we have today are mamish divinely inspired. What they had then, Nebuch, they had like as a wooden log that they would fasten to the stump. This is if a person, God forbid, had a part of his lower leg missing, and that's how they would walk, or that's how they would limp. And in Shabbos, the issue is whether you are allowed to walk out with it in a place where there is no eruv. What's the question? Clothing and ornaments, if you remember Shabbos, is not called carrying. The issur of carrying is a masa, a burden. If something is your garment, if something is an ornament, it's not called carrying. How did we view the kav? Again, this is not b'chlal negeya to nowadays, where it's a proper, it's part of your body. But then, do we view it as a shoe, or do we view it as a burden? B'meila, can you walk with it outside or not? That's a machloikas tanoim, and there's the havamin of understanding it, and then there is the maskana. So let's read the Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah, haki teyam, an amputee, Rav Meir holds, yotzei bekav shaloi, can walk out with his wooden foot. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Clearly, Rabbi Meir classifies the wooden foot, the prosthetic, as a shoe, as a minol, and garments are not burdens. No problem. Rabbi Yosi oiser. The havamin of the Gemara is that Rabbi Yosi classifies that wooden leg not as a shoe. It's not a minol. And therefore, if it's not a minol, and it's certainly not an ornament, so then it's considered a burden and it's us. Now, guys, don't forget that what we just learned right now is that if something is not a shoe, then on Yom Kippur you can wear it. However, so here's the problem. That's the kasha of Rabba Bar Huna. Of Rami Bar Chama. That on the Mishnah there is a braisa, v'tani Allah. And what does it say in the braisa? V'shavin, both Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yosi hold that asur lotzeis boy b'yom kippurim, that you can't walk out with this on Yom Kippur. And here the question is, based on our havamina, that Rabbi Yosi understands that what? That it's not called a minol, it's called a masoi. According to Rabbi Yosi, therefore it should have been permitted to walk out on Yom Kippur. We're not speaking about the carrying issue. That's another issue. We're speaking about just you can't wear sandal, ne'ilas sandal. We just established, according to almost all of the Amoraim, that anything that's not a sandal is not included in the inui of ne'ilas sandal.
Meaning it's not leather, right?
It's for sure not leather. It's for sure not leather. You can let Rav Meir here, even though it's not leather, but it's considered a shoe. But on Rabbi Yosi, the kasha is on Rabbi Yosi based on the Havamin. So Amar Abaya, no. That you didn't get it correct. That over there, the Mishnah and therefore the Braisa is addressing another issue. and that is the isbei kesisin. We're speaking about this wooden foot that has in its receptacle, in the top part in which the stump of the leg goes into, they added rags, they added materials to make it more comfortable. And so what? Umishum tainuk. The reason why the shavin, the Braisa says, is that asur is because it's so comfortable, it gives you pleasure, and right away the Gemara counters that. Again, we learned already yesterday that the isur is not because of tainug. We learned a few days ago, various Braisas. It's not every tainug that's prohibited. It's only connected to the 5 Inuim. So Amalei Rava, no, I completely reject what you're saying. First of all, if we learned good pshat in Rabbi Yossi, that what? That lav manahum, it's the reason why Rabbi Yossi says that it's asur on Shabbos is because it's not a shoe, it's not a keli. What? Just because you put in rags, you make it into a keli, that for sure not. Like a sisin mashra leimana avadinish. But you're going to say, no, Abaya emphasized the tainug. Who cares? Who cares? What, you can't sit on a comfortable chair on Shabbos? Kol tainug, any other pleasure that's not a minol, b'yom kippur mi asur, no. There's nothing wrong with being comfortable on Yom Kippur. V'haraya, and he brings a great proof, even the Amoira that was machmir, not allowing one to wear a sandal shal sha'am, he put on the kerchief around his foot. Why? So it should be at least epis more comfortable. So no, that's not pshat in the Brais. And more, v'oid, since it says in the Seif of the Mishnah, and don't forget that the Braisa was written on the Mishnah, but since it says in the Seif of the Mishnah that im yesh loy beis kibul, there were 2 types of prosthetics. The latter one had a receptacle. That means that the top part of this wooden leg in which you put the stump wasn't flat, but it was even more comfortable. It had an indentation. Now that goes into a whole different topic. And that is, when it comes to the laws of Tumah V'Tara, there is a rule that pshutei clay eights, that flat woodenware, are not susceptible to Tumah. But even if something is made out of wood, if it has a receptacle, then it's considered a keli that is susceptible. Not that it's tummy, it's susceptible to Tumah. So the Mishnah writes that im yesh lebeis kibul kesisin, if there is a place for you to put rags in, which would demand of you making a indentation or hollowing it out on top of this wooden leg, then tummy means it's susceptible to tumah. So says the Gemara Mechlal, the fact that the Sefer speaks about a beis kibul, that Eisha, there's no beis kibul. If there was no beis kibul, there was nowhere where to put the rags. That's the way they did it then. So Abaye is completely rejected. The reason why it's asur on Yom Kippur, the Kol Alma Minalhu. Even Rabbi Yossi holds it's a shoe. That's why. So if it's a shoe, that's why you can't go on Yom Kippur. Cannot go on Yom Kippur. Why does Rabbi Yossi say you can't go out on Shabbos? Ubishabbos b'hapligi, mamish, like we learned today on Amud Aleph. Marsover, that's Rabbi Yossi gozrinon dilma mishtame. The whole prosthetic can slip off. And many gezedas were made not to wear something on Shabbos, even though that is not considered a masoi, because if it will fall off, you might end up carrying it. And Avmeir has no such gezeda, so it's not related to our topic. Bottom line is that we taka paskin, is that only that which is made out of leather is included in the isur of ne'ilas sandal. There is a concept of, when God created Adam, and then that was reiterated after the Mabul, that we have a mitzvah to dominate the world, which means that there is a hierarchy. There is no uniformity in creation. There is a seder, and there are kingdoms, and one is dafka above the other. And on top of everything is God Almighty. And we were told that we're supposed to dominate the way God wants all of the kingdoms underneath us, even the animal kingdom. Animals are not on the level of human beings, and that is expressed by us wearing leather shoes, because the leather, your mom is stepping on it, you're putting the leather underneath you. So the Maral says, that when is there a hierarchy? When do we put leather under our feet to show that the min hamadabed is above the min hachai? That is in the world. In the world, there's a hierarchy. For God, it's all the same. Whenever we stand before God, we're all on the same level. We are all equally.
Rabbi, did you say that One quick question. As far as dominating the other kingdoms, is that the Jewish people or just man? Who dominates
all human beings? In other words, we are allowed, Baruch, and not only are we allowed, but if, let's say, there's a certain experiment that we have to make on animals, through which we're going to discover a cure for mankind, we are obligated to do it in the way that it hurts the animals the minimum possible. But we don't say, how do we have the right to test the rat to find a cure for a man who made us better than that? We're never allowed to make experiments on human beings, ever. Because all human beings are in one kingdom, but the kingdoms underneath it were created to serve us. And that's expressed by wearing shoes. But whenever we stand on Admas Kodesh, God told Moses, take off your shoes. When we are in the presence of, and Yom Kippur is such a holy day. And therefore, there's something about leather that we're not allowed to step on. If it's not leather, it's okay. Let's go weiter. Don't worry, I know it's late, but we'll make it up tomorrow because tomorrow relative is not so big. Tanach Rabbanan we learned. Now, guys, we're going. At least we'll start with chinuch. This is such a good Gemara. We learned in a Braisa. Tinoikos means small children. Dafke. I'll speak out in a moment. Small children, mutarin bekulam, they are allowed. Lechatchila. With all of the inuim, obviously, we're not speaking about the fifth one, but we're speaking about eating, and we're speaking about drinking, and we're speaking about bathing, washing, and anointing. Lachatchila, you can bathe them, you can anoint them. The only one that we're machanach, even young children, is for them not to wear leather shoes. Chutz min sandal. That's what it says in the Tanach. Tanach Rabbanan. Now, the Gemara wants to analyze farvos. Before we go on, just to make it clear that the Tur and we Ashkenazim, the Ramah, says that once the children are between 2 years of their bar mitzvah, which is when we begin to educate them in not fasting the whole day, but beginning to fast partially. Once children are already being educated in partially fasting, from then, we should not bathe them, we should not anoint them. That's why the lashon of the Tan is tinoikos. Tinoikos means that when it comes to eating and drinking, we dafke feed children on Yom Kippur. Before the Shazim Shulchan Aruch, there is an age younger than which they're not allowed to fast at all. So when they are not included in any type of refraining from eating and drinking, bathe them, anoint them. The only thing, no shoes. The question is, why is shoes different than the other inuim? Chinuch? Guys, this is a very important Gemara. My shna ne'ilas sandal. So the Gemara answers, because the Amri in Shei of delay, because if someone is going to see your child walking with a shoe, so then Rashi reminds us a very important din that we have in Masechta Yevamos. And that is that even though children are not obligated in the mitzvahs, but we are not allowed to, with our own hands, that's the words of Chazal, give them something that's prohibited. So let's say if a kid is so young that he's not yet being educated for keeping Shabbos, and they're opening and closing the light, you don't have to stop them. But for you to bring a child to open or close the light, you're not allowed to do that. And that's learned from Parsha Shemini by the Shiratzim. The Torah says, Loi soichlum. There's an extra, don't eat them. And Chazal say, read it, Loi sa'achilum. Don't feed them. No, it's biyodayim, don't bring them a prohibition. So maybe the reason why kids are too young to put on the shoes on their own. So therefore, if the reason why shoes are an exception is because people are going to think that you put it on, hanaknami, washing and anointing also. If a kid is going to come to shul on Yom Kippur, bathed, washed, what, he did it by himself? If he's 2 years old, is Amri Inshi of the lady. They're going to say that the parents did it, and doing it, l'chayr is asur. So the Gemara says, no, even if a child comes to shul bathed, people are not going to think that you did it on Yom Kippur. They're going to think that you did it prior to Yom Kippur. So counters the Gemara, sandal nami. Even if the kid comes to shul with a sandal, people are going to say that it was put on him before Yom Kippur. So the Gemara says, no. Sandal loy efshet, deme esmol of the lay. No one would think that the shoe was put on a child yesterday and he slept with shoes. We're not supposed to sleep with shoes. To Amar Shmuel, who was a doctor also. Hi man, the boy mitam tamad misus. If you want to experience the taste of death, I don't know why anyone would want to experience that, but if you would like to experience the taste, you should do sleep with shoes. Lisiyam misane, put on your shoes. So therefore, no one will put on the shoes on the child. So if he comes to shul on Yom Kippur with leather shoes, they're going to know you put it on Yom Kippur. That you're not allowed to do. The Gemara says that's not pshat, because it's not about what other people will say. The lashon of the Brais is mutarim lachatchila ktani. We are allowed to wash our kids on Yom Kippur. Biyadayim. We can anoint them biyadayim. Why? Ella, we'll finish with this. Tanach, washing and anointing and eating and drinking, the lav rivisayu, they are necessary. I'm sorry, Hanoch means shoes, wearing leather shoes, the lav revisayu. It's not necessary for a child's development to have leather shoes on. So Gazrubei, let the kid already have chinuch. A kid is also, not the kid is not obligated, the parents are obligated to educate the children. But Hanoch, everything, food, eating, drinking, anointing, and washing. That's important for the child's development. The revisayu, if they're not obligated, let them do it on Yom Kippur. Biyadayim. And Abaya says, my nursemaid told me that the Revise the Yanuka, the development of a child requires every day, Maya Chamima Umishcha, take a hot bath and get anointed with oil. And when you get older, aside of the bathing purta, when you get a little bit older, Beyasa Bekutsa, you should already give the child egg protein in the kutach. Gadol purta, when the kid gets a little bit older, Tavure Manam. Let the child break utensils. Let the child express his destructive emotion. And it's important for that stage of development. Wow. He would buy cracked, cheap earthen utensils for all of his children in order for them to break it. I know it's getting late, just to finish that. By us Hasidim, this concept of children at a certain young age, they need to break things, and it's good for their development. By us, it's for them ripping svarim. Whoever has children knows that at a certain phase, if your bookshelf, if your svarim shafir goes all the way down to the ground, they're going to take out svarim. That's what they do, and they start tearing it up. And that's good for their development. That's the holiest breaking of utensils. Eloma, the question is, what books do you put on the bottom of the shelf? There's a story of the Tzemach Tzedek that there was a great, from the greater Achronim, that tragically felt that the 6 days of creation cannot mean literal, and he wrote a Perush on Mishnayos, and the Tzemach Tzedek would leave dafka that Mishnayos on the bottom shelf for his children to rip that Machaber Svarim to be continued.